Welcome back to Gaza Power, our global solidarity and mobilization. Thank you so much for your patience as we work through some technical difficulties to try to continue these conversations around the globe about mass movement and solidarity for Gaza. We've been having some conversations with folks about faith in action, and we're going to try one more time to connect with our guest who has been patiently waiting for us, Rabbi Linda Holtzman. Let's see if we are able to connect with her. She's a faith leader with Tikkun Olam Chavura and faculty, Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. Rabbi Linda Holtzman, do I have you with us at this hour? Thank you so much. We were speaking with some of your colleagues in the, from different faith communities, and we are so grateful in the Muslim community to have allies like yourself. But I want you to speak very specifically about the Jewish faith and what it says in a moment like this, and how important it is to make that distinction between what we're talking about when we talk about the state of Israel, when we talk about Zionism, and when we talk about the Jewish faith. Because I know there are probably also so many difficult conversations happening within your community at such a difficult time.
As a rabbi, as someone who takes Judaism seriously, it is so clear to me that believing that myth and that being a strong Zionist is the antithesis of being a good Jew. That one cannot possibly be true to a Jewish faith if one sees Israel as Jewish. It's also gotten to me, it's very clear to me that when I grew up, and it feels to me as if one day I opened my eyes and suddenly I saw things entirely differently. Suddenly I saw what the state was doing to the Palestinian people, even before the genocide in Gaza, even before any of this. I saw what was happening, and in life, I think you can't see something and then unsee it. Once it's there, it's real. I grew up as a Jew learning that being Jewish meant having a strong moral, ethical voice. The image that was always strongest to me was that of Abraham standing up to God, who was about to destroy the city of Sodom. And Abraham says, wait, if there are 100 decent people, 90 different people, going all the way down to, 10 different people, don't destroy the city. And that model of standing up and speaking truth to power was the model for me of being a Jew. There is also a strong Jewish tradition that is called tochacha, which means that if you see anyone doing something hurtful to another without standing up to them and letting them know what they are doing that's wrong, that what you are doing is absolutely wrong. So, as a Jew, it's my obligation to stand up to the United States and where I'm an American and say very clearly, stop supporting the Israeli government with the military. And it's my obligation to stand up to Israel because they are doing things, saying they're doing them in my name, right? Saying that they're doing them to keep the Jewish people safe. And that just feels like a lie to me. That it's my obligation as a Jew to stand up and say, no, what you're doing is wrong. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I could talk.
Oh no,
I could talk
that's
forever.
I'm so glad that we were able to connect with you and get a chance to hear your voice on this important issue. And speaking also of allyship, I wanted to touch on the issue of anti-Semitism, which is often, I think, weaponized to silence folks, but at the same time, it is a very real and dangerous threat. And so, how can we in the Muslim community make sure that we are speaking up against this, denouncing it, and making those clear distinctions when we're having these conversations?
I think all of us together need to do that. And I appreciate your asking the question. Um, right now, the anti Semitism that we're feeling in the United States is coming from Christian nationalists, is coming from our very right wing government, is coming from places that are not about Israel Palestine in a way that it claims to be. I'm accused of being anti Semitic all the time. I'm sent emails being told that I'm anti-Semitic. I've given my entire life to work for the Jewish community, and I can tell you that I'm not anti-Semitic. But what I have learned through the years that I think we have all learned is that when we work together to not just combat anti Semitism, but also to combat Islamophobia and to combat all forms of racism, that then we are having some power to combat anti Semitism. That if anything, what the state of Israel is doing is increasing anti Semitism because it is very hard for people to distinguish between what Israel is doing and what the Jewish community is doing. It's vital for me to separate the two, that being a Zionist is not being a Jew, that the state of Israel is not being Jewish. That's not what it's about for me. That there's so much more to Judaism than just Israel. And as you said in your question, that's so insightful, it is being weaponized. It is clearly being used to stand up and say, "Oh, look, there's anti-Semitism," and then accusing anyone who is anti-Zionist of being anti-Semitic because they're doing that conflation of Judaism and Zionism, and they are not conflated. They are not one. The only way to combat anti Semitism is for us to work together and to combat Islamophobia and anti Semitism together, and we need to be doing it as one.
Rabbi, thank you so much for your words and for your patience working through it, working
Thank
through all
you.
the technical issues with us, and for staying with us. And I'm so glad we were able to speak. Thanks for your time.
Oh, thank you very much.
And of course, this remains the moment to continue to organize. And we want you to continue to join the movement, to stay connected with campaigns and actions and advocacy and justice in Palestine and beyond. We want to build power, amplify voices, and stand united for human rights and continue in the spirit of conscious action. So we're moving now to the heart of today's discussion, really, and that is justice. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about that in our next segment. For those who are joining from home, you are watching Gaza Power Hour, and we are all having to show a little bit of resilience here as we work through our technical challenges, trying to speak with folks, first of all, in lots of different time zones. We discovered today that the UK moved into daylight savings one day before Canada. We've got our daylight savings tomorrow, and the UK's got their daylight savings today, which means that we actually were an hour different than what we were anticipating, not realizing that daylight savings was happening a day apart between Canada and the UK. So working through lots of technical difficulties. But just a reminder for folks at home that the purpose of this program is a call for mass movement of solidarity and mobilization with Palestinian voices being silenced and punished for too long, and that call for liberation being ignored. We've been watching those atrocities in Gaza and the West Bank for 2 years. And of course, we know this didn't start in 2023. We know that our brothers and sisters have been facing injustice for decades. We're going to try again with our host in Washington, Hazami Barmada, who's going to take us into our segment on the case for justice with Gaza and the global conscience.
I always say that technology is both a blessing and a curse, and I happen to always get the curse side of it myself. So Here we are. I think you all can hear me, so I'm just going to go ahead and continue. But thank you to everybody for joining from wherever you are in the world. This is indeed a very timely and critical conversation to be having. I am very honored to be moderating a panel called The Case for Justice, Gaza and the Global Consciousness. And what we've seen over the last 2 years is unimaginable suffering taking place in Gaza, genocide, mass civilian casualties, the complete destruction of infrastructure from hospitals to housing to water plants to electrical facilities to homes. And the ongoing struggle for accountability and justice has not even begun. But beyond numbers, these are humans. I want to remind people that these are families and children and parents and doctors and journalists who are not only risking their lives to continue to document their live stream genocide, but are also being targeted for simply having the courage to tell the truth and to work for the rehabilitation and support of people in Gaza. This segment, I am very honored to be joined by people who are not only documenting the injustice, but are also challenging it and challenging the global silence and lack of action to bring justice and to stop the genocide that is currently ongoing. I do not think I have all my speakers with me, but I will introduce the two that I do see currently. We have Omar Shakir, who is the Israel and Palestine Director at Human Rights Watch, whose work has been central in investigating war crimes and human rights violations. Welcome, Omar. And we also have Eyad Amawi, who is from the Gaza Relief Committee. He's on the ground physically in Gaza, facing directly the aggression and inhumanity of Israel, while also trying to bring relief to Palestinians that are being attacked daily and are struggling to cope with basic living. And I believe if we can pipe her in, we also will be joined by Dr. Naledi Pandor, who's South Africa's former Minister of International Relations, but I will introduce her if we can get her on. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start our conversation and quickly will introduce myself. My name is Hazami Barmada. I'm a Palestinian Syrian American social innovator and human rights advocate based in Washington, D.C. I want to explore with my speakers what justice actually means in the current context. I think for a lot of people, we are seeing justice as this abstract term. We are seeing that the entities that are supposed to be tasked with the responsibility of ensuring that genocides do not happen and ensuring there's accountability are not only failing in their duty, but are actually actively part of perpetuating the ongoing atrocities against the Palestinian people. So I'm going to start with you, Omar. Despite the repression, something is changing around the world today. From South Africa to the US college campuses, people are naming apartheid and genocide. The media is obviously lacking behind and hasn't quite gotten there with regards to being able to openly acknowledge what is happening. But I want to ask you, as somebody who's been studying what is happening and documenting some of it, what are you seeing in the shift today? And also kind of tell us a little bit more about what you're documenting and how that's contributing to the larger narrative change.
Yeah, I mean, great to see you, Hazami, and many others. And thanks for everybody taking time on their Saturday to talk about Gaza. My concern has always been that when a ceasefire, between quotes, comes into place, that people's attentions will shift elsewhere. But this is precisely the moment, as has been said, that we need to keep the focus and eyes on Palestine and on Gaza. So, I mean, I think I want to answer your question in sort of two ways, right? I mean, just the bigger picture, and I could talk about maybe Human Rights Watch after that. If you were to have told me, 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago that we would be in a world in which the International Criminal Court has indicted Israel's prime minister and former defense minister, where that the International Court of Justice is hearing a case on genocide and has issued binding measures to protect Palestinians from genocide. If you were to have told me a number of states have cut arms to Israel, some have entirely cut arms, some have reduced the arms shipments. Pretty much most of the countries in the world, sans the United States, and even the United States did to a very limited degree, briefly under the Biden administration. Again, as problematic as that was. If you were to have told me that there would be sanctions that a number of states had issued against Israeli government officials. Some states, some including even Prime Minister Netanyahu, but other leading government ministers. If you were to have told me that Israel would now be on the UN list of shame for abuses against children, if you were to have told me that the International Court of Justice would have issued an advisory opinion that found the occupation unlawful, that Israel is committing apartheid, I could go down the list of things. I could talk for another 10 minutes, but the point is the list of things happening, and it's not happening in a vacuum. It's happening because of the solidarity and actions around the world, the protests that people have been taking to the street, because certainly we know of the deep complicity of governments in these abuses and their unwillingness, despite the the massive amount of slaughter and starvation and displacement and destruction on the ground. But there has been a shift. Now, if you also were to have told me 2.5 years ago or 2 years ago that the majority of Gaza's homes and schools and hospitals, the vast majority, would have been damaged and destroyed, that well over 60,000 people, the majority women and children, have been killed, and likely, by the way, much more than that. If you were to have told me that Gaza would have been starved to the point that a famine had been declared, I mean, people forget that Gaza, is an urban setting, a very educated population. For famine, that's the result of a man-made decision. If you were to have told me that the entire population would have been displaced, if you were to have told me that large parts of Gaza would have been fully ethnically cleansed and razed to the ground, I also wouldn't have believed you. And if I put those two things on a scale, unfortunately, the abuses are much heavier than the actions that have been taken. Much more could have and should have been taken. That said, I think there is a consensus around genocide around Israel's commission of genocide against Palestinians. And it's not just genocide, right? I mean, Human Rights Watch has also documented war crimes, including gunning down Palestinians seeking food aid, including the use of starvation of civilians as a weapon of war. We documented that from December of 2023. Crimes against humanity, including extermination and forced displacement. The list goes on and on and on. So the documentation is there. There are shifts happening, but it's not happening fast enough to actually achieve the ultimate objectives, which are obviously stopping the slaughter and the slow and fast death, protecting civilians, getting accountability and justice, and addressing sort of root causes, because obviously this didn't begin on October 7th. So I could say a lot more, but we have some fantastic other speakers, including in Gaza. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Hamad. And I think it's a really important thing to acknowledge is that the tides are shifting, but it hasn't shifted quick enough to end the injustice that we're seeing now, the real cost of inaction of the world. And while it is important that the conversation is changing, what is not changing is the consequences of global silence and inaction on the ground. Eyad, you are you're at the heart of Gaza right now as we speak. And we hear words like ceasefire and aid. And those things no longer mean safety to people. They no longer mean security. They no longer have any weight for a lot of people. I'm going to ask you, specifically to address not only what is happening on the ground in Gaza today, but what does resilience mean in that reality where the world is failing, where institutions are failing, yet people in Gaza continue to show up surrounded by devastation and loss, yet they continue to innovate, they continue to create, and they continue to endure. Talk to us about that.
Thank you, Hazami, and I hope you are all my colleagues. Thank you for your time, and really, your voice reaches our heart, and really, you show your life conscience. Show for us here that you haven't forgotten Gaza, you haven't forgotten our children, our injuries, our suffering. Really, we appreciated your attendance. I'm Eyad Amawi from Gaza Relief Committee and also representative for Children at Number, who is responsible for evacuating children from Gaza within the genocide. Yes, I thank you and thank all of my colleagues that talk about the suffering. We appreciated your attendance also. It's not easy for us to live with these conditions under the genocide for more than 700 days. But from my side of view, your solidarity, your support, your life conscience push us and let us have a resilience here in Gaza. Your efforts is really touch our hearts and touch our souls, and we touch your conscience and your support and your stance at every moment. We hope these efforts mobilize our suffering and achieve all of the political sides to increase the pressure over the government of occupation to stop the genocide. You know, there's no real ceasefire up to this moment. When I talk to you, I hear the explosions and they complete their bad missions to destroy the remaining homes in the eastern part of the Gaza Strip. So when we talk about the ceasefire, they use a deception manner to keep going, serving us, let us suffering from famine, from chaos, from starvation, from shadow economy also. All of these sufferings that made by their hands, and they from day to day they choose a lot of targets, and they at the last operations they attacked us. Yeah, bro.
كمل يا أخي.
Yeah. And they targeted more than 100 targets. They caused more than 100 martyrs, and half of them children, and caused dozens of severe injuries within the last few days. So when we talk about the ceasefire, it's just a play, and they play a game. And when we talk what's our needs now, urgently, Gaza is still suffering from the huge catastrophe. No one can imagine when the winter is entering Gaza. I expect, from my position as aid coordinator and NGOs coordinator, we will face hundreds of deaths and injuries flooded by waters and sewage waters. Look, my colleagues, the catastrophe is past what we can describe. Everything is completely destroyed. When they systematically, by very well calculated policy, they destroy the infrastructures, they need to let the environment infectious. When they closed all of the 14 cross points within the fenced border and opened just only one cross point, Karam Abu Salim, they fully control every amount by the quality, by the number, by the type, and to prevent the nutritious food. What the meanings? They need to starve our children and cause immune system diseases for a long time, and to lose our next generations. This is the equations. They very well calculated it to let us suffer for a long time with the next generations. And when they destroy all of the infrastructures, what the meaning of destroying universities, schools, and preventing our children from attending and continuing their education life? They need to let us suffer from chaos. When they made the chaos and they re-engineering the chaos and managing the famine with another shape, today they just entering 89 trucks with some aids with the little amount of tents. And for the technical clarifications, they mentioned to our local sources, they haven't appeared to entering more trucks. The reality here, they need to winter to entering, and to prevent entering tents and shelters and mobile homes to let us suffer more and worsening the situation. When we talk about water, Hasman, my colleagues, we have a shortage in the sweet water that no one can meet. What's the meaning of shortage of water? Up to date, we lost more than 25 underground beer here, under the ground water. You can imagine when we talk about sewage water, it's just entering deeply after they exploded the surface of air by explosive robotics with more than 2 tons of high explosive materials. What's the damage under the ground and over the ground? It's completely destroy the life sign. And also they destroy the agriculture and farmers, preventing them What's the meaning of the yellow line? They need to prevent the farmers from entering and farming our lands again and to renew hope for our civilians here. And also, for a lot of hidden reasons, they prevent nutritious foods and cause a lot of immune system dysfunctioning for children. And as a representative for children and numbers, we are responsible for evacuating more than 300 babies within the genocide. Really, I witnessed a lot of our babies have emaciated bodies, suffering from famine, yellow face. No one can imagine what's the meaning to put our children under this pressure with the different horrors and tragedies and talking about ceasefire. The meaning of ceasefire is reopening all of the crosspoint. The meaning of ceasefire is opening Rafah crosspoint and granting permissions without restrictions, entering trucks and aids and especially tents. Our needs nowadays, we need more than 300,000 tents urgently to prevent a catastrophe from entering winters. So when we talk about a genocide against humanity, it's still happening now. And Gaza need your support, your mobilization, your talk, your stance. No one can imagine what's the next time we'll face and what we will face this. No one can imagine what's the meaning of open fracture for a lot of injuries, still waiting medical evacuation, still waiting reopening Rafah crosspoint from the Israeli occupation side. As occupation power, their responsibility to reopen all of the crosspoint and implement the humanitarian protocols and to save what we can save. We have no time, Hazima and my colleagues, and thank you again. I will grant you time to return to my colleagues, and thank you again.
And thank you, Eyad. I mean, it's just heart-wrenching. We hear these live testimonies. We've seen the videos. We've seen the photos. We've seen the documentation. We've heard every major human rights organization in the world, every major institution has acknowledged what is happening, has identified what's happening, yet we can't seem to stop it. And I'm going to turn to Dr. Pandor. I introduced her earlier, but I'm going to reintroduce her. She's South Africa's former Minister of International Relations and became the face of the ICJ case accusing Israel of genocide. And Dr. Pandor, welcome. You led one of the most historic moments in modern diplomacy when South Africa stood before the ICJ accusing Israel of genocide, something that a lot of the world not only refused to do, but were covering up for it. They were going a step beyond that and actually enabling Israel's atrocities. You know, many called this moral courage. Others called it political suicide. And we're hearing now testimony from Eyad on the ground in Gaza. I mean, what we're hearing out of Gaza does not even amount to the truth of what is actually happening, that we are not even hearing about the torture that's happening in prisons, in detention centers, the inhumanity that truly knows no bounds. I'm going to ask you, Dr. Pandor, to reflect on what it means to take a stand in the current political environment where the very systems that were set up to prevent these atrocities have been sheltering for them and enabling them. Please talk to us about your experience and what it means to challenge these systems.
Well, day to you, and thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you to the hosts of the Gaza Hour for inviting me to participate. I think that taking a stand is extremely important in today's world because we are a world that agreed many decades ago that we would act in concert to protect those who are oppressed and vulnerable. This is why we framed international law. International law commits all of us to a standard of practice that should apply to every human being. International law means that each one of us must be ready as part of the global community to stand up in support of those who are experiencing oppression. I'm actually quite disgusted at the degree to which the world has been silent in the face of the terrible onslaught against the people of Gaza and of the occupied Palestinian territories. And I think really one needs to just repeat the call that we expect everybody to stand up to make international law a practical reality for all of humanity. And I express my deep appreciation to those in civil society who have been so active, particularly the youth who have stood up bravely against the might of the security forces in our various countries and have marched in protest in support of Palestine. We need to do much more in order to succeed. And I hope that programs such as this one really begin to solidify a global international solidarity movement that will mount major campaigns that will ensure that the people of Palestine become free. We need to be mounting an international campaign for the freedom of all political prisoners, for the freeing of Mustafa Barghouti. We need to stand up and speak as one, as the global community, as we did against apartheid South Africa. And when we stand up, we must realize that those who practice evil, those who practice genocide, they wish to, practice terror on each of us to make us afraid of standing up in support of the oppressed. They will kill, they will maim, they will torture. But we need to multiply our forces in opposition to this genocide, in opposition to this oppression. And it's only when we stand together as humanity that international law works. It doesn't work when just one country calls it up. All of us as the globe who have sat as member states in the United Nations and voted on significant treaties and conventions, we need to show that those treaties mean something by being ready to stand up as South Africa did, to use international law to challenge perpetrators when they abuse human beings.
And that's a very powerful point. And I know there's a lot of conversation happening around, for example, the Uniting for Peace resolution and that being a potential mechanism in order to circumvent the US veto and occupation, in essence, of the UN Security Council. But a lot of what you're talking about also requires documentation and making sure that we are holding people to account. Omar, I want to come over to you. Some of what we're seeing right now is documentation of war crimes. And we are seeing, for example, the collective punishment of civilians, attacks against civilians. Right now, today, I was reading an article about Israel being more upset that someone leaked a video of torture of Palestinian prisoner or hostage, rather, a captive, than the fact that he was actually sexually and physically assaulted and abused while in captivity. I want to ask you specifically about accountability and justice and what that looks like in a framework of an ongoing genocide. What role does this documentation play in accountability, and how can we start to think about accountability when we're still in the midst of the destruction and chaos?
Yeah, look, I think accountability and justice has to mean multiple things. I think everybody thinks accountability and rightfully thinks about wrongdoers facing their day in court. And that is very much the heart of it. But I think there are a couple of different things to talk about here. I mean, I think one, I'll list three or four points. One is, I think, recognizing that this fragile ceasefire, yes, it brought the prospect of relief for Palestinians in Gaza, less intensity, but as we heard very, very eloquently from Eyad, certainly not an end to it by any stretch of the imagination. So I think part of dealing with justice and accountability is to stop all the abuses in real time and protect civilians. So that means obviously ensuring that aid freely flows in, ensuring that services. I mean, you heard about water. I mean, it's just Human Rights Watch had an entire documentation about access to water, and it's not just that Israel's cut access to piped water. It's the deliberate destruction of water infrastructure. It is the blocking of repairs to the water infrastructure. It is all sorts of measures that led us to conclude that the Israeli government was creating conditions of life designed to destroy the Palestinian people in whole or in part, which is the core of genocide. So there's that aspect of it. There's also ensuring that Palestinian communities can return, that rebuilding of their homes and schools takes place. And that, of course, we're dealing with the larger context, right, in terms of like the movement restrictions, and we don't forget about the West Bank, of course, where we continue to see really, really grave abuses, including rampant state-sanctioned settler violence, killings of Palestinians, displacement, abuses in detention. So I think part one is you have to sort of and to be able to stop those abuses, documenting them and pulling the right levers of pressure are really critical. And I can talk much more about that. I think another part of it is dealing with root causes. We can't simply get ourselves in the mind of, let's just, of the moment. We have to remember Israel's apartheid and persecution of Palestinians, which existed on October 6th. We have to remember the closure and blockade of Gaza. We have to remember that Gaza's population is majority refugee. This is a population that has a right to return to the homes that they've been denied to. If you don't start your conversation by remembering that most of Gaza are refugees, you don't understand, the one and two here. So I think if we take those issues off the table, if we take out the 50 plus year occupation, if you take out the closure, if you take out apartheid, if you take out the return of refugees, if you take out the larger repression of Palestinians, you're not having justice, because justice, can't be built. No peace agreement can be built on denying fundamental rights. And then, of course, you get to the piece about you get the piece about accountability. There's one other element that I'll get to after that, which means you need the research to be able to hold people accountable, because the law is different than what you see on TV. We all see the destruction on TV, but to be able to pin, war crimes under the law or crimes against humanity, you have to meet very high evidentiary thresholds. You have to show that an attack was indiscriminate or disproportionate, and our eyes don't lie to us, but at the same time, that's not evidence in court. You need to underscore that there was no, military target. If there was a target, it was disproportionate. Or you need to show that starvation was a deliberate policy. Or you need to show that displacement orders didn't comply with the international humanitarian law framework, and that has to be built on research. So when South Africa brought the case they did against Israel on genocide, they had an incredibly powerful brief that was built on facts. They cited Human Rights Watch, they cited many other human rights organizations, and that's the reason, why the court issued the binding provisional measures, which of course Israel is ignoring outright. But you need to have the factual documentation. It's very hard because Palestinian human rights defenders in Gaza are themselves facing all the difficult conditions we talk about. So you need to be able, in the absence, and the reporters can't go in, investigators can't go in. So you're relying on open source, on satellite imagery analysis, on virtual interviews. And the last thing I'll say, because again, I want to hear from our other speakers, is part of justice is ending complicity. Right, so it's ending complicity not only of countries that are supplying arms, but also companies, right? Corporations that are providing the Israeli military with technology, that are providing that are operating in occupied territory. So I think justice means all those things. It means civilian protection, atrocity prevention. It means dealing with root causes. It means accountability in the courts and otherwise, by the way, not just at the ICC, under universal jurisdiction in courts around the world. And finally, it means ending all forms of complicity in these abuses.
Dr. Pandor, I'm going to come back to you because, Eyad, I want you to be our final word. It only makes sense that we end with the voice from Gaza. So, Dr. Pandor, I'm going to ask you. We're talking and we're hearing Omar talking about kind of international law and the importance of kind of the process for accountability. We're also seeing a mass global surge of people around the world that are outraged by the atrocities that they're seeing unfold on their mobile phones, but also feeling like their governments and their systems are not reflecting the will of the people. We the people is part of so many preambles around the world, and also the UN, charter, but yet we the people seems to not have weight when it comes to these systems that continue to favor political power and favor businesses and corporate power over the will of the people. I want to ask you, what mechanisms and political strategies can we start to think about as we leave this conversation with how can we put we the people back into these systems, and where does it make sense to build alternative systems in order to push for the end to the genocide and freedom and justice for Palestine?
Well, I think that one of the first things is we need to convince everybody that what is happening is wrong. And that means educating the broader public. We're not doing enough about persuading many more millions to join this struggle against apartheid Israel and the struggle for the freedom and justice for the people of Palestine. So I think communication and broader public education is extremely important. I believe, as I said earlier, that there's an emergent global movement, but there is insufficient coordination of the value that is inherent in such a global awakening. We need to be talking coordinated campaigns. We need to have joint strikes, joint boycotts, joint stayaways. If we can work at that level, the pressure will become so intense that governments that are currently the backers will be compelled seeking solutions. But without that pressure, which we have in apartheid, we are not going to get the level of fire. The foundations are there. It's now drawing in organizations that will make good on that foundation, that will help coordinate and develop a coherent global campaign that gives us a big push toward freedom. I believe that this is necessary. I agree on the matter of data, and we benefited from human rights organizations in Palestine, as well as human rights organizations working bravely in apartheid Israel, and UN bodies that were able to provide us with huge amounts of data. It is important that we consistently collect it, because often what happens is when you reach a settlement, then people think you must forget. I would want to encourage the freedom-loving people of Palestine to ensure that once freedom
I think we lost you there, Dr. Pandor. I think we have lost you. And when we get you back, I think we might have you back. I think you were just wrapping up your thought there, Dr. Pandor. We can hear you again if you want to just complete your thought there.
essentially I was concluding by saying that one of the things we need to do, given the data and information that we have collected, once we have reached a situation where we believe we can negotiate a proper settlement, we must ensure that settlement includes the perpetrators of genocide facing justice. They must not be allowed to get away with the crimes against humanity that they have. But we all have to agree as the global community that once freedom is achieved, we will ensure justice.
Indeed. And on that note, Eyad, we will work to ensure justice. Eyad, I want to come to you to close us out here, please. You know, the world continues to rally its support around Gaza, yet no matter what we do, it seems like we are not doing enough. And we keep seeing, you know, failed agreements and failed promises. People like you keep showing up every single day. Bisan and various others keep reporting every single day. What keeps you grounded in hope? And what is your message to everybody who's watching from around the world around what they can do and how we can be better allies to the people of Gaza?
Yeah, thank you. This is a big question, but I need to add something very important to my colleagues, Omar. When we talk about preventing, aiding Gaza and supporting Gaza, when you talk about UNRWA, the meaning of preventing UNRWA and it's not administrative request, it's a humanitarian needs. So this is very important to increase the pressure to grant UNRWA and resuming their works urgently. As a refugee from old Palestine, 1948, I know, I recognize what's the meaning of UNRWA work here. Without resumption of UNRWA work, there is no real relief for Gaza. So the Israeli Knesset, they announced the prevention for UNRWA to work again in Gaza. They know what's the meaning of working UNRWA here over the ground. So from my perspective and from my aid workers and NGOs coordinators, we must pressure over the occupation government to let UNRWA work, and I know they will grant us dignity and provide our people with the fairness distributions and with our special needs urgently. They have a capacity, they have hundreds of warehouses for distribution systems. They try to find alternative solutions like GHF. It's a death trap, and no one can recognize a tangible change over the ground, even though the ceasefire is implemented. So, what's the need? Gaza doesn't need just pity; it needs a continuous struggle and genuine humanitarian support. Continue your positions and your efforts, my colleagues, and religious and humanitarian duty rooted in living conscience and also responsibility toward what's happening here. Gaza needs your voice and to remain loud and your pressure constant as the world is beginning to forget. You know, the Israeli used the ceasefire as a deception manner to pass their roadmap to destroy Gaza and to expel us from our land here. So I will summarize the 7 basic needs now. If you hope to listen it, my colleagues. The first things, immediate humanitarian interventions to bring tents, especially before the entering winter, opening the Rafah crosspoint urgently to evacuate thousands of children and injuries who are still waiting from long time ago. And third, urgent relief for 45,000 of orphans and compensate for them. No one can take care for this account of orphans without intervention from the countries and UNRWA from our big organizations in the international community. And for deployment of specialized medical team for preventing infections here and to control infections here in Gaza after the infectious environment is still ongoing. Entry of technical team to test contaminant of water and to test what's the new disease is in our water. Provision of large quantities of safe drinking water also to the Gaza. And 7, opening permanent humanitarian corridors under the supervision of international community to save what we can save, especially for children. I hope all of the international community doesn't forget our children, doesn't forget our humanity. We trust in you. We trust all of the free peoples. We need to document. We need to compensate our society after they completely destroy our buildings here and they destroy every life sign. So Hazima, keep going and we will not give up. We have a resilience here in Gaza, even though I still hearing the explosions now in the eastern part of the Gaza, but we will continue with your support, with your solidarity. Thank you, my colleagues, again and again, and big heart from Gaza to your support and to your nice solidarity here. Thank you so much, Hazima.
Eyad, I promise you one thing, we will not forget the children of Gaza. The people of Palestine, the people of Gaza have awakened a global consciousness that we will not only not forget, but we will not stop fighting for. I want to thank my amazing guests for joining me, Dr. Pandor, Omar Shakir, and Eyad Amawi, and thank you for the continued work. I just wanted to quickly recap by saying I think the main thing that we've heard from every single speaker here is not only the moral duty, but the action needed in order to end the atrocities. We must continue to mobilize. We must continue to speak out. And Dr. Pandor, I will make note of two important dates, the 28th and 29th of November. There are many global communities that are planning global shutdowns and a global strike. And we invite everyone to join us. We will continue to shut it down for Palestine as we continue to mobilize not only action to end the injustice, but also action to continue to raise awareness and educate folks about the power of the people. And Palestine will be free. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So thank you for joining. And I am going to hand the reins back over to our esteemed guests. Thank you so much for joining us.